Raise your hand if you've never been thrown out of the White House. Put your hand down, Zelensky. By now, I'm sure you're familiar. And if you're not, let me give you the 30-second version of what happened yesterday at the White House. President Volodymyr Zelensky from Ukraine flew to Washington, D.C. His job to sign the rare earth minerals agreement with the United States of America at a live press conference with President Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. The mineral deal had already been assembled. It had been put together. All he needed to do was show up, shut his mouth, and sign on the dotted line. He only did one of those three things. And while they were meeting in the Oval Office, he and J.D. Vance got into a little tiff about some diplomatic questions that Volodymyr Zelensky had for the president and vice president. Also, he was rolling his eyes and shrugging his shoulders and did not seem to be in full agreement with the agreement. Donald Trump wanted peace. Volodymyr Zelensky, it seemed, wanted to continue the war for as long as he possibly could. Here's the kerfuffle that was caught on camera, mainly because Donald Trump didn't kick the cameras out of the room, between Zelensky and President Donald Trump that made headlines and history.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country.
It's back
to you. Far more than a lot of people said they should have.
And that went on a little while longer. There were some questions from the media, and then Donald Trump said, you know what, why don't we just end this? Cameras, get out. There was a little bit more back and forth. Zelensky was taken to a private room, and then Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, and NSA Director Mike Waltz walked into the room and instructed Volodymyr Zelensky that it was time for him to leave. It was time for, they called his car, they pulled it around, and they escorted him out of the White House. This was not at all what was supposed to happen, but it did. And now as the story begins to unfold, as the story begins to unravel, we start to see that this was probably something that we should have seen coming based on Volodymyr Zelensky's behavior, both past and present. Scott Bessent, who was sent to the Ukraine, to Kyiv a couple of weeks ago to initiate this deal, said he had a similar back and forth with Volodymyr Zelensky when he met with him in Kyiv at the origination of this rare earth minerals agreement. He said there was screaming and yelling back and forth, and there was consistent lying because Volodymyr Zelensky, we don't think, ever really wanted to sign the agreement or initiate peace with Russia and an end to the war, which has made him an international celebrity.
President Trump sent me there to, again, we were supposed to bring the Ukrainian people closer to the U.S. people, send a strong signal to Russian leadership that they had not only shared values, but now shared economic interest, and also have a strong signal for the American people that their tax dollars were actually going to work. Instead, President Zelensky and I had a very tough 45-minute meeting at a very loud decibel level, and I kept telling him, Mr. President, the purpose of this is to show the Russians there is no daylight between us. And at the end of the meeting, he said, well, I'm not signing this. And I said, at the end of the meeting, I said to him, what do you want to go out and tell the press? I said, because I don't want to go out and show the Russians that there's daylight in between us. And he said, well, I'm going to go out and say I'll sign it in Munich. Then he got to Munich, and he ran into Vice President Vance and Secretary Rubio, very different than Vice President Harris and Secretary Blinken, but he didn't sign the agreement. So finally, we were supposed to have the signing today. It was supposed to be a great day, and this is one of the biggest own goals in diplomatic history.
This is a history of not signing an agreement. This is him really yanking our chain all over the globe in Kyiv and Munich and here in Washington, D.C. And Scott Bessent said, look, we're not Joe Biden. We're not Kamala Harris. This is not Anthony Blinken you're dealing with. You're dealing with Donald Trump, Marco Rubio, and J.D. Vance. You're dealing with an administration that is not going to send you another dime, that is not going to allow you to fight this war that is unwinnable against an adversary and an enemy that will fight longer and harder than you. The killing has to stop. The dying has to stop. The endless funneling of cash that is totally unaccounted for. All of that has to stop, and it stops now. And that is something that Volodymyr Zelensky just flat out does not want. Or at least he didn't want it, of course, until Donald Trump threw him out of the White House. Here's Scott Bessent to tell us what happened immediately after he was asked to leave.
We were having a press conference, we were going into lunch, and then we were going to sign the economic partnership agreement. This was supposed to be a day where Ukraine and the U.S. intertwined our economic prospects, and instead, President Zelensky, and I think he's probably used to dealing with American leadership that is weak, and he ran into President Trump, and who didn't back down, Vice President Vance, who didn't back down. They were asked to leave the room, then they had to be asked to leave the building, and they were texting everyone, begging to come back out and sign the economic partnership. And I tell you, it's impossible to have an economic partnership for someone who doesn't want to be your partners in peace.
And that is the long and the short of this. That's what's really at the crux of this situation. Donald Trump wants peace. And so he offered this minerals agreement because he also wants to get our money back. We've spent $300 billion on this war. That's billion with a B. None of that money has been recouped. It's all a loss. Half of it, they don't even know where it is. And Joe Biden and the Congress, they just kept writing checks and sending money. And Volodymyr Zelensky would show up here. He'd get a hero's welcome and state dinners, and they'd bring him into Congress. And Nancy Pelosi would be slobbered all over him, going, Slava Ukraina, and just handing him big bags of cash and gold bars. And it was really disgusting and kind of irresponsible of them. But, you know, they're Democrats, and disgusting and irresponsible as probably the two best synonyms I can think of for anyone in that party. But Donald Trump says, no, we're going to end this war. And in order to end this war, we need to protect you. But in order to protect you, we need your rare earth minerals. We need that for diplomatic reasons. We need that for strategic reasons. We don't have a lot of our own. So here's the deal. You give us a percentage of your precious metals and the rare earth minerals that are underneath your soil, and we will protect you from dying. We will keep Russia at bay. It's a one-on-one economic agreement. And Volodymyr Zelensky didn't want that. He wanted an economic agreement with the United States, not so he could create a ceasefire, not so he could come to the table and say, stop. He wanted to have an agreement with the United States of America so he could go to Russia and say, nah, boo-boo, stick your head in doo-doo. Now I've got America on my side. We're going to keep fighting. And that was not at all the agreement. And Donald Trump sniffed it out from the moment he showed up in the Oval Office.
We had a meeting today, as you know, with President Zelensky, and I would say it didn't work out exactly great from his standpoint. I think he very much overplayed his hand. We're looking for peace. We're not looking for somebody that's going to sign up a strong power and then not make peace because they feel emboldened, and that's what I saw happening. I'm looking for peace. We're not looking to go into a 10-year war and play games. We want peace.
We want peace. Stephen Miller, the deputy White House the deputy chief of staff, was on with Jesse Waters, and he said, look, this is exactly what's going on. And the weirdest thing about this is that Volodymyr Zelensky, who is the leader of a country who is war-torn, buildings have been demolished, cities have been destroyed, hundreds of thousands of people killed or moved away, uncertainty every single day, the stress, the devastation, it's horrible, and the war continues to fight. You would think this is a guy who, if he was really representing his country the way he said he was representing his country, if he was really looking to protect his people, this is a guy that you believe would be looking for peace or a ceasefire. And Stephen Miller says that is absolutely not what Volodymyr Zelensky is looking for.
There are many remarkable and disturbing things that Zelensky said. He repeatedly rejected President Trump's statement that we should pursue a ceasefire.
Right.
How could you reject a ceasefire? And you know, he kept saying Europe's doing so much more than us. Well, then what do you need us for? If he's saying Europe's so great, then why are you coming and begging and pleading to us for money and protection and guarantees? President Trump is a peacemaker. He will fight for peace. He had peace for 4 years under his previous term. And today we saw what it's like to have a strong leader in the White House, and the whole world saw what it's like to have a strong leader for America.
And a lot of people are saying, look, you know, Volodymyr Zelensky, he overplayed his hand. He did overplay his hand, and he did damage to the people of Ukraine. And those text messages that were flying back and forth between his people and Donald Trump's people and Marco Rubio and everybody else, that was a sign of him realizing that he bluffed and he got called. And now he's trying to cash in his chips, and it's not going to be allowed. Donald Trump saw right through him, and now he's going to need more guarantees. He's not going to sign a rare earth mineral deal with Volodymyr Zelensky if Volodymyr Zelensky's not going to go to the table. Some senators, including Lindsey Graham, who you really have to take at face value because that guy changes like the weather. But Lindsey Graham's now saying we need a new leader in Ukraine. There needs to be an election. We can't go forward with Volodymyr Zelensky because nobody really knows if he's looking for peace. Nobody really knows what's on his mind. And that's something that Karoline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, was asked about yesterday. She reiterated that same fact. Donald Trump wants peace. America wants peace. Everybody wants peace except for this guy.
The president has made it clear always that both sides need to talk equally to bring both sides to the table to negotiate a deal. And, in a good deal, any good deal, whether it's in business or in politics, both sides usually walk away a little bit unhappy. Unfortunately for Zelensky, I think he refuses to recognize the practical reality of this war. It's been going on for years. His countrymen are dying. And the people who have been funding this effort, the American people, are sick and tired of footing this bill. So it's a much different situation for him than it was 3 years ago. And as President Trump said today, he doesn't have any cards. The cards are not in his favor. They're in President Trump's favor. There's a new leader in the White House who has much different priorities than the last administration. He wants peace. He wants the war to end. And it doesn't seem like Zelensky wants that quite yet.
Nope, not at all. So then the reporter said, all right, well, Donald Trump threw him out of the White House. In fact, here's the official statement from Donald Trump. We had a very meaningful meeting in the White House today. Much was learned that could never be understood without conversation under such fire and pressure. Basically, what he's saying is, I learned the truth about Zelensky when things got heated. It's amazing what comes out through emotion, and I have determined that President Zelensky is not ready for peace if America is involved, because he feels our involvement gives him a big advantage in negotiations. I don't want advantage, I want peace. He disrespected the United States of America in its cherished Oval Office. He can come back when he is ready for peace. That was the official statement. Karoline Leavitt was asked, okay, what's next? And here's what she said.
I defer to President Trump on what his next step is and what happens moving forward. But the president made his position quite clear today when he asked Zelensky and the Ukrainians to depart the White House. He feels as President Zelensky is not in the right mindset to negotiate peace. And I think, frankly, that was reinforced with his comments on Brett Baier refusing to apologize for disrespecting the president and the American people in the Oval Office. The president, Zelensky, was in the White House today and had a real chance to sign an economic agreement that would have been great for the American people to recoup our tax dollars and great for the Ukrainian people to rebuild their country. And unfortunately, he blew the deal up in his own face.
Yeah, he sure did. And that Brett Baier interview, which this is an interesting fact, too. And I'm not going to play any clips from the Brett Baier interview because this is the 47 Daily podcast. This is information direct from the White House without any kind of spin or propaganda. This is, if it comes from the White House, it goes to my mouth and your ears for the next 4 years. That's our motto. So Zelensky left the White House. He did not come back. He did not come back to sign the agreement. He did not come back for a press conference. He canceled an interview, or a meeting rather, at the House of Ukraine, which is basically the Ukrainian embassy in D.C. He decided he wasn't going to go and talk to the Ukrainian people, but he kept his appearance with Brett Baier on Fox News, which goes to show me that Volodymyr Zelensky is not concerned with his people. He's not interested in peace, but he's really, really interested in a little bit of publicity while he's here. That interview was not anything that helped his cause or, endeared anyone to him, at least not in my opinion. It was more of the same. And Brett Baier repeatedly tried to get him to apologize to Donald Trump or offer an apology to the Trump administration, and he flat out refused. Caitlin Collins on CNN asked Marco Rubio, what do you want him to say sorry for? And she was immediately sorry that she asked Marco Rubio that question.
But what specifically do you want to see President Zelensky apologize for?
Well, apologize for turning this thing into the fiasco for him that it became. There was no need for him to go in there and become antagonistic. Look, this thing went off the rails. You were there, I believe. It went off the rails when he said, let me ask you a question to the vice president. What kind of diplomacy are you talking about? Well, this is a serious thing. I mean, thousands of people have been killed, thousands. And he talks about all these horrible things that have happened to prisoners of war and children, all true, all bad. This is what we're dealing with here. It needs to come to an end. We are trying to bring it to an end. The way you bring it to an end is you get Russia to the table to talk. And he understands that attacking Putin, no matter how anyone may feel about him personally, forcing the president into a position where you're trying to goad him into attacking Putin, calling him names, maximalist demands about Russia having to pay for the reconstruction, all the sorts of things that you talk about in a negotiation. Well, when you start talking about that aggressively, and the president's a deal maker, he's made deals his entire life, you're not going to get people to the table. And so you start to perceive that maybe Zelensky doesn't want a peace deal. He says he does, but maybe he doesn't. And that active, open undermining of efforts to bring about peace is deeply frustrating for everyone who's been involved in communications with them leading up to today. And I think we should apologize for wasting our time for a meeting that was going to end the way it did.
How great is Marco Rubio? Man, there's not a person in this cabinet that I can complain about. There's not a person in this cabinet that I look at and go, maybe not the best choice. Well, we'll wait for those Epstein files to be released before we make any judgments about that. But Donald Trump has chosen Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, doing a bang-up job. Pete Hegseth, the Defense Department Secretary. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, who has come a long way from being Lil Marco. And that right there, this back and forth, this entire deal, the way that Marco Rubio has handled himself on the international stage shows you exactly why he was confirmed 99-0, a unanimous vote in the Senate. And moving forward, I think all of these players, not just the ones that were confirmed by the Senate, but the ones that weren't, like Stephen Miller, Deputy Chief of Staff for the White House. He gave Jesse Waters a summation of this entire thing that I want to leave you with, because in my humble opinion, it is one of the best explanations of what was supposed to happen in the White House yesterday, what actually happened in the White House yesterday, and why every single American should be livid at what Zelensky and Ukraine have been doing to the United States of America and apparently continue to do to the United States of America.
I don't think anybody had any idea that Zelensky would be so impertinent, so disrespectful, so insulting to the United States of America. Look, this is one of the great moments in the history of American diplomacy. The way that President Trump and J.D. Vance stood up for American interests on the world stage, the way that President Trump defended Americans after years of being fleeced and abused and taken advantage of and taken for granted, millions of American hearts swelled with overflowing pride today to watch President Trump put Zelensky in his place. The only reason that Zelensky has a country, that Zelensky is in power, is because of the United States. Americans have suffered economically, funding this war now for years. American security has been degraded, our stockpiles depleted, our ability to project power in other regions of the world negatively affected to protect and defend Ukraine. Americans probably don't even know the true extent of just how much military support on multiple levels and fronts America has provided to Ukraine. And then this man shows up in the Oval Office and lectures us, says we have to do more, says we're not as good as Europe, says that we need to provide them a forever war guarantee, fight Russia till the end of time. No American watching that today says they want to send their sons and daughters to die on behalf of Zelensky. And President Trump was clear and firm and principled, saying either you're our partner for peace in ending this war, or we can't work with you. And Zelensky, for the first time since this has begun, finally met a Western leader willing to assert their own interests, the interests of their own country, and not bow down to and venerate this man as a messianic figure. Americans have watched with horror as Zelensky has been treated as a messiah. Our hearts all break for the suffering and loss and death. But you know what will be even worse? World War III. And today, President Trump said, we are not going to let this escalate into World War III. He defended the Oval Office, he defended the White House, and most importantly, he defended the American people. And I was honored and proud to be there to witness this moment in history.
It is a day that I will never forget. I'm sure you will never forget. It's an unforgettable day, and it's going to have historic repercussions for years to come. And I believe that what happened in the Oval Office yesterday will bring peace sooner than it would have had it gone the way that it was planned. What happened yesterday in the Oval Office was the mask being taken off of a world figure who, as Stephen Miller rightly put it, was venerated and made into a messianic figure. He was turned into a legend by Hollywood and by Congress and by Europe and by Vogue magazine and by everybody else who, all the celebrities that flew over there, Ben Stiller and Sean Penn bringing his Academy Award. All Vladimir Zelensky's been doing is elongating a conflict which seems to benefit him personally and have a negative effect on everybody else that he comes in contact with. Well, he's now come in contact with Donald Trump, and Donald Trump says, take off the mask, show's over. Listen, if you enjoyed this, please make sure you subscribe to our page, subscribe to this podcast. We also have another daily podcast, Mark Kaye Saves the Republic, and you can find it wherever you download your podcast. There's a link right over here if you'd like to click it. It's one of these places, and you can subscribe to the playlist as well. Mark Kaye Saves the Republic every single day at noon. Download, listen, and enjoy.